And actually, let's go back to our games real quick, and we want to make sure that we just return that game value. I don't think it makes much of a difference, but just be safe. And we also want to replace this with our final array. So now we can move on to our next object we're going to render is going to be our game stream. So let's make that route for it. We can just copy and paste. And this one's going to be a little bit different just because we're going to use a dynamic URL. We're going to pull in data depending on this second link. So if we click on this, we can see that we have the name of the URL here, and this is what we're going to want to use to basically dynamically generate this, to pull in this info. So to do that, we're going to have to make that URL what's called have a URL parameter. So we're going to do /game/ hyphen or comma, whatever that thing is, and then ID. And this is going to allow us, this basically React Router allows us to send this value to our component as a prop, and we can use that inside our component. So now we're going to import game streams from ./components/game streams, and that's what we're going to render here. So save that, and now if we click here, we can see we get game stream components, but because we haven't done anything with it, there's nothing custom about it. No matter which one we click on, we can see we still get that same thing. So now we're going to go into our game streams, and we're going to make sure we can customize all that. So inside this component, first thing we're going to do is we're going to destructure the props. So we're going to take in match as well as location. So both these come from, by default, because it's wrapped right like this, React Router gives us access to these. So what we're going to do is just print these off so you can see that we can pull in this data. So we'll just do a couple li tags, and I'm going to show you, these are what we're going to use to format our API calls. So first thing we're going to do is match.params.id, and we need to make sure we put brackets around this. So match params ID, and then we're also going to do location.state.game ID. So if we save this, and now if we click on this, we can see we get League of Legends and also this game ID. And if we go into these other ones, we can see we also get, so this is all dynamic now, and this is what we're going to use to make our API calls and also format some of our data. So something I kind of copy and paste that code into our games thing, so I'm going to go over this a little bit more in depth. Basically, this is our styling for, this is all Bootstrap related, all these classes. You can see that for that top image on our card, we're using a game box art URL, which is what we formatted. You have the game name, button success, that's where we get that green button. The big thing here is this link element. So you've seen the link element before, that's how we move around here. But the big thing is this to section. So we're creating a dynamic path name, we're just doing game, and then we're basically concatenating the string so so that the link is game.name. So if we go over here, you can see, if we go back to this, my internet's down, so that's why this isn't loading right now. But anyway, if we concatenate this game name on, that's how we get that dynamic link for each of those cards that show here. And then the big thing is that we're passing in the state. So you can see we're passing, instead of just a string, we're passing an entire object. So the path name is what the link will take you to, and we're also passing in state. So for game ID, we're passing in, if we look at our documentation, we're passing in this game ID so we can pull in further data. So that's how that's going to work, and that's how we pull this in. This is where our location.state. So if we go to game streams, this match.params.id, that's what's coming from here. This location.state is coming from this little section here. So you could put anything in here. You could change the name of this to whatever you wanted. You could change it to derp or anything, and you would have that available as derp right here instead of game ID. One other thing I forgot to mention you should look out for is that in some cases you might get where it's not rendering the images or stuff like that. That could be because you're hitting your API limits for Twitch. I think they have a limit like 800 requests per hour or something like that. So if you start running into issues, that could be because if you're refreshing a lot and it's remaking that API call, that could be the cause. So if you want to double check that, you can come into your console and check the network tab, or even right here, and you'll see you're getting it says you're getting 429 errors. That means you're hitting their API limit. So that's something to look out for. To prevent that, and you can see why, is that we didn't add an empty array here. This basically will prevent a lot of re-rendering. So you want to make sure you add this empty array after your use effect, right before this ending parentheses. Make sure you have that array there. And while we're here, we're going to grab our API and our link again, because for game streams we're going to be using that as well. So now for this game, actually I don't think we don't need this link, but we do need the API. So now we're going to use state and use effect again. Use state, use effect, and now we're going to make our API call. So we're going to need two different pieces of state for this one. We're going to do stream data and set stream data, do equals use state. We're going to do again an empty array, and we're also going to do going to set this equal to viewers, because we're going to have to calculate how many viewers for this. For top live streams, we're going to need that to calculate the specific number of people. So we're going to do viewers and set viewers. And we want to make, instead of an array, we just want this to be a number, because we're going to basically be accumulating a value to set as that top view count. So again, we're going to do use effect to make our API call, and we're going to do the same thing, basically similar structure at least. We're going to do fetch data again, and you can name this whatever you want, it doesn't matter, but we're just going to call it that. We'll make another async function, and then inside this we're going to do const result equals, and we also need to grab our API so we can make those calls. Oh, we already got it, never mind. So API dot get, and what we're going to do is we're going to do instead of a normal string, we're going to use these backticks and make it a string literal so that we can dynamically format this URL depending on the location we're at. So if we go the base URL, if we go to our references, what we're going to want to go to is streams. So if we go to get streams, we can see this is the base URL, and then we can provide a game ID just to get streams based on a specific game. So that's what we're going to want to do here. We're going to want to provide a game ID. So we're going to do base URL, and then we're going to provide a query game ID, and that's going to be based upon our game ID that we're passing in from our location. So we're going to do $, whoops, we need to be inside the brackets, $, and what we're going to want to do is that location dot state dot game ID, and that's what we're going to take in, and that's going to dynamically make that API call depending upon which of these things we click on. So whichever one of these will get that name, and we'll pull in our data accordingly. So then once we've got that result, what we're going to do is we're going to create our data array again. We're going to set that equal to our results dot data, and then underneath that we're going to have to again, we're going to have to format our URL. So we're going to do let final array. We're basically going to copy and paste, and this is one of those examples where you could optimize this. You could create inside here, if you wanted to, you could create a helper function area instead of copying and pasting this code. But for a small project like this, I'm not going to mess with that. So we're going to do our data array dot map again, and we're going to do stream. Then we're going to basically copy and paste that URL formatting function again. So let URL equal, paste that in, and all we got to change is just stream. And if we look at our API documentation, we can see instead of box art URL, we need thumbnail URL. So change this to stream.thumbnail URL, and again it's just replace, and then thumbnail URL again right here. And then once we get after that, we want to get our viewers. So what we're going to do is do let total viewers equal final array, and we're going to do reduce. So reducer, it allows you to do basically combine a bunch of numbers in an array, or combine whatever's in your array into one return value. So we're going to do the standard, which is an accumulator, and then the value. So the second one is going to be the specific value as we loop through the array, and this accumulator is basically going to be the sum as we go through the array. So we're going to put brackets around these two values. And then our arrow function, and basically inside this what we're going to do is we're going to do return accumulator plus the value dot viewer count, and that's coming in basically from, if we look at our reference, we can see each stream has this viewer count value. So what we're doing here is we're looping through this array that we're returning, and for every value inside that array, we're basically adding them together to get this total view count. So if we click here, this is the value we're going to generate. All these numbers here, the specific value, we're adding those all together to get the total view count. So it's pretty simple little function. So then below that, we want to make sure we add a 0. This tells it that we're making that the final value is going to be a number. And then all we got to do below that is do set viewers. We're going to set the viewer state to total viewers, and then we're going to set our stream data to this final array. So pretty similar to our previous thing, our previous game component, because the layout's the same. And this is something where instead of basically doing an almost exact copy of here, you could create a component you could create a list component to basically generate these cards when you provide data to it, and you could create a helper function for this stuff as well. So that's something you could add to your own project. Once you have this base built, you could go back when we're done with this video and you could do that yourself. So then final thing we gotta do is we have to call this function. So fetch data, call that function, and add this empty array here as well. And we can just console.log this. We'll save and make sure we don't get any errors. So we can see everything's working properly. Now we just need to basically take that data in and format it down in our HTML. We have the data available. Now we just have to use it. And before we actually start mapping through our data, let's make sure that we for sure have our data formatted properly and that we can pull it in. So we're we'll check our viewers. This right here, if we can get this, it means all of our data is coming in because it's based upon, we're pulling that from our main API call. And looking at this, we forgot our await, so that could cause issues where this code would proceed without our data from our API call, so that could cause issues. And this is also, we should make sure we return the stream object. So now let's save, and if everything works properly up here, you can see it starts off at 0 and then it bumps to 25,000. So that's basically what you would expect. It starts off at 0 because that's the default value, and then it waits for this API call to return, and then once that's done, it calculates and we set the state, and that's when it updates to whatever number this is. So we can see that based on the fact we can get this viewer count, it means we're also pulling in all of our data for each stream. So now we can proceed to basically loop through all of our entire data array and basically create what we want right here, which is going to be, by the end of this, we'll have League of Legends or whatever top game. So whichever one we click on, it'll dynamically add the name, add this, and then give us the thumbnails and all that for each of those live streams. So basically, we can get rid of this. And what we're going to do is, again, I'm not going to bother wasting my time typing. I'll just paste it in and explain it to you after the fact. So what we're going to want is paste all this in. And make sure we don't have any errors. We'll save. Let's go back. Now we can see that everything's working properly. So if we go to our main, click out, we can see that we got everything is from the finished app to this is the same. And we have what we didn't change yet on our main, which we will now. We'll copy and paste this. So if we go to our top games and we zoom in like that, we can see we don't get that breaking. So if we go really small, it starts to look pretty bad. So what this code does is with Bootstrap, we have on large screens, it'll do 3 columns, because Bootstrap's grid has 12 units basically. So on a big screen, it'll have a size of 4, which means it takes up, 12 divided by 4 is 3, so that's why we see 3 here. And if you go smaller, you'll drop down to 2, and that's because on middle-sized screens we set it to 6, and on big ones we set it to 12, which means it's full width. You only have 1 per row basically. So we need to go back to our games here, and we need to replace this with that main thing. And the MT5 is the spacing, which creates, instead of being flat like this, we get a little bit of space in between. So that's some Bootstrap related stuff. Moving on to explain exactly what this HTML is doing. We have our text centered with match.params.id. So that's what's giving us, this is what we're pulling in from the URL. If we look at the URL here, we can see it's League of Legends. So this match.params.id value is right here. For our viewer count, we have our viewer state we're pulling in, and again we're doing, so 25,000 people, and it's wrapped in this text primary, which makes it blue. And then people watching, and we pull in that match params ID again, so we get this dynamic name of the game there. Inside our row, we wrap this object is where we map over our stream data. So for each stream, which it returns a value, if we go back, it'll return an array of about 20. So inside this array, each of these is a stream, and we have 20 of them, so we're mapping over. So for each of those, we create a card, and we pull in the image, the thumbnail, so that's this. The card body is just a general wrapper around this stuff. So we have our card title is our stream, the username is this, and then for each one we have our stream.viewer count. So for this specific stream, we get this viewer count. And then here, if we want to, instead of using a link tag, this is going to link us out of our app. So we have a button with our button.success, which makes it green, and the href, the link out, is their Twitch channel. So we use their username, we use the base URL of twitch.tv, and then their username, and the target's blank. So if we click on this, instead of taking us out of our app, it'll open it up in a new tab, and we can see their stream. This is an example of something, if you want to go the extra mile for your own app after this video is over, instead of linking out to a new, instead of linking out to their channel, you could create another route, and you could embed their channel. So you'd click through here, and it would go to their channel, it would go to a new component, and you could embed their stream right inside your own app, so you do not take them off, so they're not leaving your website. That's something that you could also do. So now the only thing left to finish our app that we have to do is our top live streams. We still have that, just a generic component. So what this is going to be is if we go to our streams component, we're going to want to pull in we're going to need to make another API call, so we're just going to pull that in. And we're also going to, again, need to use state, so use effect and use state. And it's a pretty similar thing. Like I was saying earlier, we're repeating a lot of code, which isn't best practice for a project, bigger project. You'd want to make sure that you basically break this stuff out so you don't have to keep rewriting the same code. So that's, again, something you can do for your own project. So we're going to do channels, set channels, equal to use state, and this is going to be an array again. And do our use effect. And inside this, we're going to do the same thing, const result equals await api.get. And what we're going to do for here is just grab streams. Actually, we can, in our games, we can see the URL, actually game streams. Instead of adding a parameter for game ID, which specifies the game, we're just going to do streams, which means it'll grab the most watched streams regardless of what game they're playing. So that's what we're going to use for this one. So we're going to do .get. Make sure we have that wrapped in a string. And then we're going to do let data array again equal result.data. Data, and we're just gonna, and we can console.log it to make sure that we're pulling that in. And then let's see here. Oh, we forgot to do this inside the fetch data function. So const fetch data equals async. Let's just copy and paste that inside that async function. And that's why we get this error here, because we have the await, but we don't have the async. So if we paste that into here, we can see that error goes away. And then right here, we can do fetch data and save that. So now if we go back, we can see we're pulling in that object. And inside that, if we look, so we can see we We got username, we got a game ID that's 18112. We can see each of these, they have different game IDs. That means we're pulling in from various different game types. So we got the data we want. Now all we need to do is, again, display that data. And for this, actually, it's kind of a pain, because if we look at this, this doesn't return the game name. Instead, it returns only the game ID, which means that we're going to have to make a second API call dependent upon this so that we can get the actual name. Because otherwise, if we look at our final app, we can see that we have, for each of these, we have these displayed. And if we didn't make that second API call, we wouldn't be able to display that data. We'd only be able to display a number, which doesn't mean anything to normal people. They're not going to know what game ID 18122 is. So to do that, we're going to get rid of our console.log, and underneath that, we're going to have to do let game IDs. We're going to pull out those IDs from this array, so data array dot map, and we're going to do so for the streams inside our data array, we're going to return stream.game. Do stream.game ID. And what this will do is basically create an array just with, if we console.log it, game IDs. Okay, save that. And if we did this properly, we should get an array. And we can see right here. So now we have this array with just game IDs, and we can use this to make our API call to get the actual names. So again, we're going to close this out, and we're going to have to format a URL to do that. So we're going to do let base URL equal, and the URL we want is games. So if we paste this in here, we can go to our documentation and we can do get games, and what we can see is you can insert a query param with the ID, and you can do either one or you can do multiple. And what we're going to want to do is basically generate one. Instead of making a different way you could do this, you could map through it and you can make like 20 different API calls, but that's really inefficient. So what we're going to do is create a dynamic URL and append these parameters at the end. So you can see here they did one game ID. We're going to dynamically generate this URL so that we have a string. So what we're going to want to do is that base URL, and then we're going to want to loop through and create that final URL. So we're going to do let query params equal an empty string. And then what we're going to do is we're going to loop through game IDs. So game IDs dot map, and we're going to do ID. And what we're going to do is append. So we're going to return query params. That's going to be equal to query params plus our backtick. We need to format this. So it's going to be ID equals $, and we're going to drop in this specific ID, and behind that we have to put this @ this and symbol, so that the next one also gets appended. So basically what's going to happen here is we're going to append for the first loop, we're going to drop that in there, and we're going to add that to the end, and then for the next one it's going to happen again, and we're going to form a URL that has basically all 20 of these appended, and it'll pull in that data. So once we have that, we're going to set let final URL equal base URL plus final URL, or plus query params. And if we console.log final URL, save this again, we should see our URL. And here we go. So you can see we have this URL now with all these appended values on it. So all we gotta do now is use that to make our API call. And that's going to be, we can then append that to our, basically replace that value, or basically generate a new value on our data array object. So let final array equal, so we're going to map over our data array again, and then for each stream in that array, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set stream dot game name. So this is our new, this is where we're going to store that value, and we're going to set it by default. It's going to be, in case there's an issue with the API or something, we're going to set it to blank, just a blank string, so we don't get an error or anything. And then we're going to do another array. So let's see here. Get our final URL. Oh, we need to make that API call, I forgot. So we're going to do let game names equal await api.get. We need to make that API call, and we're going to do final URL. And then we're going to set our game name array is equal to game names dot data. So this is another API. We can see it's the same as this is our first API call that we extract the data from, and we're doing the same thing here where we're creating this array that's going to return all those values that we wanted. So then inside here we're going to loop over that game names array, and we're going to append those values. So we're going to do name. Inside this we need to do a comparison. We need to make sure that we're getting the right stream ID, that it matches up so that we got the right name. So we're going to do if stream dot game ID equals name dot ID, and then we're going to return stream dot game name equals name dot name. So that might be a little bit confusing, but basically what's going on is for every stream we're going to then loop through this game name array and try to find the match. So we're going to find the match inside this data, and once we found it we're going to set this new value. So instead of being empty, it's going to be this name.name. So what's if you're confused here, what name.name is basically it's representing this. So inside this array that we returned, we're going to return, instead of this ID, we're going to return this name, and that's what's going on. So if we look back here, the game ID on that array of streams is going to match up to the ID here, and when that matches up, we're going to return that and add that to our object. So that's what's going on here. And we also need to, underneath that, we need to again do that URL replacement that we've reused multiple times. So we're going to do let new URL. We have to update that value again. So that's just the same code we've reused quite a bit. And then once we've done that, basically once we've made those changes to this object, we just have to return that stream. So basically we're taking that returned of all those channels based on the top live streams. What we're doing inside this loop is we're adding the game name, and we're also updating that URL value like we did before. So this one's a little bit more complicated than the others because we have to make a second API call, but other than that it's pretty simple once you kind of go through it a little bit. So what we want to do is again add this empty array. And let's make sure, let's see what this is. I don't think that should be an issue. So let's save and make sure we don't get any errors. And it looks like everything's fine, which means all we have left to do now is that we have that data. Actually, we didn't actually set our data. So we do have to do one more thing. So we have to set channels. So that's a simple, you always have to remember, if we don't do the set channels to update the state, we did all those API calls for nothing. So that's what we have to do. We want to do final array That's what we want. After we've made all those updates to that object, we've added the game names, we've done the thumbnail update, now we want to set the state. So if we save, we can see that we're not getting any errors. So I think we should be good. Now all we have to do is going to basically make the changes to the HTML. So I'm just going to copy and paste again, and I'll go through and explain what's going on. So hopefully, if we save, everything should work properly. So we're going to go top live streams, and everything's working as we would expect. We have our game name, so let's go and take a look closer here. So basically we did the same classes as we did for our other two routes. We just did the formatting so that it'll adjust based on the screen size. We have our row. We have inside here again, it's pretty similar layout. So we have our thumbnail URL that we're pulling in here. We have our game name, the channel name, and then we're bringing in the live count views based on the viewer count, and then just the same button with a link, an external link again. And this is, like I was saying earlier, you could make a component over here called embedded stream, and then you could direct this button, instead of going to the outside channel, you could direct it to that dynamic embedded live stream component. So that'd be a nice little feature to add to this. But if we go out, we can see that basically our current app is exactly the same as our final app, other than I think the issue, we don't have this text centered, and I think the issue with that is that we don't have, back in our main route, we're going to wrap this in a div, and we have to add a class to this. So get rid of that and make sure this div is inside the routers, and we're going to add a class name. We're going to add app and container.fluid. If we save, I think that should, yeah, there it goes. So now our text is centered just like that final. So that was the only thing, it was just a little CSS change. But now you can see all of our routes work. We can get top live streams. You can click on to open that up. You can go top games. You can choose a specific game. Go Grand Theft Auto. And looks like we do have a bug because it's showing, for every game it's showing the same thing. So if we go back, let's double check. So we can see that, yeah, so we have to go back to our code. There must be something wrong with our API call, because instead of showing the specific game, it's basically showing the top stream. So my guess would be, if we go back to our code, let's see. So yeah, so that's the issue, is that a really simple thing is that we're missing the equal sign. So it's basically, because this query param there's an error with it, it's just defaulting to the top stream. So all we have to do is add an equal sign and save. And you guys probably realized that a long time ago, but now if we go back, we can see that we're actually getting the proper data. So that's pretty obvious as soon as you realize that thumbnails weren't showing Grand Theft Auto. Yeah, so now we got the right thing. So simple mistake, but you can see that it can cause big issues. But so that's it for this tutorial. If you liked it, hit subscribe. I might do some future videos building off this, so if you're interested in that, make sure to subscribe. If you do make your own custom changes, you can feel free to post a link below so that other people can check it out. But other than that, that's it for now.